Hey, I'm going to try and be a little bit quicker than usual because this takes a little bit of time. And I did actually make a couple notes, and the notes may extend it a little farther. I guess some typical disclaimers that how my head looks is not the point. It'd be best if production values and aesthetics would be ignored in order to get the message, because this might be the most important message about righteousness and authority that there is, and it's kind of a new thing for me, so I'll describe it all. And it's about the cause and what that is and why I call it that and why some others would call it that, and what happens in the cause and what happens outside the cause. And it's not just a dry bunch of stuff about legal things. What it has to do with is how you understand. What I'm going to do is, and what I expect to do. I mentioned on my Facebook page that I'd made a video for Chris, and it's not exactly accurate that I made a video for Chris. What it had to do with really is in the video that I was working on, and I'm not going to be sharing it because I don't want to take it apart into a bunch of little pieces, because there was two big interruptions with my granddaughter and some wasted time, and I talked about some stuff I didn't necessarily want to get on board with. It might be more difficult, might mess with this message, so I'm not going to use that. But the reason I'd mentioned Chris was that back when, I don't know, probably 2012, I guess, I was when my page was pretty new and Chris was interacting with me there. We talked about a little bit back and forth about some things that interested us, because there was we had listened to some wise and interesting anarchists, actually, and we I figured out that anarchy just means not being ruled, and I recognized that it fits righteousness, because being ruled isn't righteous, and it was now, so I was starting to go after that, and I'd mentioned thematically for a while on my page I was talking about Jesus being an anarchist, and this might prove it, but this will definitely prove that anarchy is not unrighteous, but is rather more righteous than archies, and it'll take us a while to get to that, and I'm going to say that I think that at a certain point I'm going to say that I think this proves this proves that government can't be righteous, I guess, is probably where it goes the strongest. And I'm not sure if it's proven exactly, but I think you'll get the idea of how much threat is under, if not. And I don't know, it's hard to prove things, because it's hard to prove that a lack of something is right, because zero can't be proven exactly. You know, there's nothing to point to exactly. I don't know. Rather than let my head start going and interrupt what I'm going to talk about, let me talk about the cause. But I just wanted to mention that it was really not exactly a thing directed to Chris particularly, except for that we had shared and talked about some things that I'm going to mention in this. Seemed like there was another one too that was kind of a thematic thing that will show up. We'll see. I'm going to contrast over the course of this time what is called authority, which is not really authority. Authority is property, and it proves out, and I think that this whole overall talk will prove that out, and except for the idea of judges being able to decide between two combatants, the judge comes in between, is in between them, and he decides how to take them. They were loose and free. One of them observed the other one, made a judgment of him, devalued him really in his sight, and decided to take some action of force. He took an action of force. This one may have defended, maybe not, might have been just hit by the force, and then he comes to be in a fight with the other because he's first offending and then wants to punish the guy and wants to get set right and everything. So they're in what we'll call a cause, and they're in a controversy. They're turned against, contra against, first turn. So they're turned against each other. And when the brother isn't won, when you don't, when it doesn't work, or you don't try going to them and talking to them, and if your brother hears you, you've won your brother, and the controversy is gone because you've won your brother. If you don't do that and they're still in the controversy, then the community and the victim have need of force coming to the harmer, and the force coming to the harmer is exercised by either by the community and we're not going to talk about the whole Matthew 18 description of the cause and how to bring more force and what to do at the end if they don't hear you, and how, if you fail to win the brother, how they're out of the community. It's not really about that. We're going to talk about judges coming between and why they can do that. And it's not because they're special men. All men can do this, and when you're in or following or looking at a worldview, not a religion, but a worldview that includes that the sons of God are peacemakers. This is what peacemakers do. They intercede between those that are at war in some sense. And it's always two individuals where this works. And I might talk about collectives after a while, because you can't really miss out on watching for the wrong views and the wrong ideas and the wrong ways that come from believing that these things are about a collective. They're about two individuals that are fighting each other. And if one man is harming another man, then this is about the force to stop that harm and to set it right if it can be, and set it as right as it can be, to set back the one who had the perfect right to be secured as a sovereign soul in his possessions of his life and his liberty or sovereignty and the things that he held. And he's been harmed by someone else's choice, and if he can't get relief for that and get it fixed, get it stopped and fixed, then others intercede, and that intercession is a judge. And I mentioned that they're not special people, that everyone should do this. And when you stop thinking that it's a million people, but you realize it's two, and then a third that comes between them, that it's local, it's completely local as far as in the close community. It's people who know each other mostly that will do these things, and it's where the organic and intrinsic and real community and reality, because it's close enough to be local enough to be real, that community is the ideal place for that to happen. And having someone far away come and bring force and pretend that they're exalted into some position, and to pretend that somebody else far away is exalted in a position to be in charge of everybody, and inviting them into your fights is harmful in some ways. And it's that error is driven and enhanced and even maybe begun by collectivism. The idea that you can gather a lot of things into it and then work some power in that thing is it loses its reality when it spreads out into outside of view and reach. The inclusion of that which is outside of your view and your reach and your it's outside of reality. Once like over on the other side of that hill, there's things over there that are real, but they're not real involving me because I can't reach them and can't contact them and never will. So anybody that's over there, the idea that them and I have anything in common is fiction, and that fiction messes things up. So we'll have to watch for collectivism and everything. But the judge, why does the judge have the ability to come in between those guys, and where does he get the force from? The force comes from that there was a force that was exercised by the harmer. He made a move and brought force, and it was a harmful force, and that force is the originator of the returned, or it's not exactly returned, maybe it is returned. the force to stop him and to set the other one right, and to take control of the two in order to set them to rights comes from the harm that happened. And why I started to call it the cause, I need to mention, and hopefully I'll be a little less clumsy than last time and quicker. There are two words that have been on my mind for a while: accuse and excuse. And accuse is when the root word starts with the C, it's the prefix ad, but when the root word starts with the C, they use AC, so AD and AC are the same as a prefix. And cause, the accuse is cause, and the ac part is to, so it's to or toward a cause. So an accusation is something that is toward and to a cause where two people are going to be engaged in a well, what you might think of as a lawsuit maybe, but they're going to be fighting about something, and the accusation is usually going to be on the part of the harmed, who is saying that the harmer has harmed them. And that opens up, maybe not opens up, but actually enters and establishes and works toward a cause, and that cause is to be adjudicated because it can't be left alone. Justice requires that it be taken care of, and the community also does, and so does the victim. So the force that we have to be clear that the force doesn't come because the judge has power to force people. He doesn't have power to force people outside of interceding in the cause. It's slow enough to kind of think about it. If he's not moving into between these guys and forcing to fix this by setting things right and dissolving this cause, then he doesn't have any more power than anybody else does. Maybe I need to say that a little differently because we're not quite there yet. He has power he has force because of the force of the harm, and because of the need to fix it. Not because he's special, once again, but because he is the one who is interceding to break up the cause. You know, you kind of like picture like kids are scrapping or whatever, and you're going to break up their fight, after school fight. A teacher comes over and he gets between them and he kind of pushes them around and everything. It's not like the teacher just walks around because he's special and gets to, and teacher is an authority figure idea, but even a neighbor, who's not a teacher, they don't go around throwing kids down and they don't go around throwing kids down, but if you're breaking up a fight and you push them away or whatever and throws a kid down, then what you're doing isn't really going around abusing kids. What it is you're using the proper force to stop that one from continuing to pound on his victim, mutually or whichever. So the force comes because there is a aggression and a force and a mutual force between the two. And that force has to work on both of them, and so that judge has to take control of both of them, and it's really a property control. He takes control of their liberty and the things that they own is in the situation where there's going to be property crime in the sense of things being stolen, needing to be returned, and that kind of stuff. He takes property. Well, control is the exercising of property. So for him to have control over those two, there has to be a temporary property control. I must say authority. I'm being careful not to say authority because I don't want you to just think in terms of worldly authority systems. I want you to think in terms of the cause and the judge and everything else away from these three men, members of mankind, not men specifically, but gender, but members of mankind. Everything away from them doesn't apply because none of that stuff is involved with the cause. So the force has originated in the cause. The accuse, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that. Accuse means to a cause. Excuse means out of a cause. So importantly, if the one who's harmed excuses them, goes out of the cause, turns away their part of the mutual force to allow the the fight to stop, like the remitting their sins or forgiving them, then the cause stops and there's no need for a judge because they've been excused. So be into the cause means that you're into the place where there's a fight, where then a judge fits there and should fit there, and excuse would be out of the cause. Then there's no longer a place in between them for the judge to fit, and there's no need for him to do that. But there's also no force that he's responding to, because the force that has been the cause before the excusing, or the out of a cause before they turn out, the force that had been there before is no longer there, so there's nothing for the judge to be forcing in. And this really is actually, I can go ahead and say that things are proven here if we really can look at it. I think it'll be sensible to do that at this point. We need to think about what happens when force is thought to be, well, not even just thought to be legitimate. When force is occurring between men and it's not in the adjudication of the cause, then where does its justification come from? If one guy has hurt the other one by bringing force, then responding to that force is the origination and the reason for that response, and the rightness of it is in direct kind of equal and opposite reaction thing to the wrong force that happened. So that force originates it, and so when this adjudication isn't going on, this judge interceding between these people in a cause, when there's no cause specifically that we're looking at, then what originates the force? Something else originates the force. And I would say just straight out that outside of judgeship and a force, that forcing other people is controlling something that you don't own. And this is probably where it moves into the proving of it. And these principles work in all things about righteousness with men, and having not been taught that authority is property, because you've been taught that authority is something else by tyrants and masters who want to have authority to tell people what to do. They won't tell you that authority legitimately, or not even legitimately, because that means legally, that. Let's talk about why authority is property, and this will help here probably to really establish, and it'll help you to establish in understanding righteousness beyond almost everybody that you know already, if you start to even consider and work on in your mind that authority is property. You control what you own, and this is the simple but difficult to avoid few sentences here. Let's have them, I guess. You control what you own. In property and ownership and authority, at least those words fit as the same thing. I'll think of the other three. There's two more that are the same, but I'm kind of circling and trying to get back on my exact point. You control what you own, and that's right, and that's always right. You don't control what you don't own, and that's right, and that's always right. And putting it in a negative way, the second part of it, you don't control what you don't own, and that's right. But also, if you control what you don't own, that's wrong, and it's always wrong. When someone else owns something, they have the right to control it, and you don't. And so if you control it, then you are controlling something that you don't own, and it's always wrong. But controlling something is treating it as your property. What else would it come from? And what I'm talking about is controlling men. You control men as a judge in that situational thing, because both of them are condemned in the sense that the condemnation is that they have lost, by being in the cause, they've lost their ability to say to the judge or to others, forget it, you don't tell me what to do, I'm a free man, and not yours to boss around. Not yours is actually, a bit loaded there. It's not, not an accidental thing. I'm not your property to control and to boss around. And that does not continue to apply when they're in the cause, because the cause, in order to be adjudicated, has to be a judge taking control of the victim and the harmer both. And so both of them are in this sense condemned. Condemned is a compound word. Also, dem means loss of value, and con means with. So someone who's condemned is with a loss of value. And what is the value that they've lost? Well, this is one of the things I've just mentioned is part of the value. Their liberty and their right to not be told what to do by people who do not own them, and being controlled as if someone has some legitimate ability to own and control them. That right has been diminished and forfeited during the cause, because you have to be subject to the decision of the judge. Whether you're the harmed or the harmer, both of you are temporarily condemned. And it's not that you're condemned all over and everybody should condemn you, and that you're in some kind of condemnation that reaches even to heaven or whatever. I shouldn't say that. That's a little bit distracting, actually. The condemnation isn't. It's not only for the guilt, because the harmer is guilty and the victim may have not had any guilt, but he has the place where he's going to be forced and reduced from his liberty and his sovereignty and his ability to say no and to choose for himself. That's just being reduced because of the cause. So he's not guilty in the sense of being blamable for starting it, unless he accuses someone and hadn't been harmed by them. Of course, that would be guilty. That would be causing a cause without cause, and would be guilt on his part. But it's not exactly the guilt that the condemnation is. It's the loss of the ability to be outside the control and the power and the thumb or whatever of the judge. And so being caught in the cause means that both of them do not have their full rights. When they're outside of a cause, why would they not have their full rights? Something else happens if their full sovereignty and their liberty and their right to control themselves and the things of their life has been messed with. Something else is happening. And it can't be traced to their harmful force because they haven't done anything harmful. So this is why what is outside the cause is when there are men controlling other men outside of a judicial cause. Those men are controlling someone that they do not own. And those men who they are controlling, the ones who are controlling, whether they know it or not, or care or not, or find it benign or aggressive or whatever, it doesn't change that they're not owned by the one who's controlling them. And the justification for controlling two men in the cause, it comes from the force again of the harm, and that they are in that temporary and condemned because they're not free anymore. The judge comes in, they're no longer free, and they're in that cause, and that needs to be set apart. And when they are set apart, then they're back to their full rights, and even the harmer should also be when the cause is done. It depends. There's other factors involved in what might happen after. But the idea that Jesus would have had, and what Jesus would talk about in the remission and retention of sins, he would have their sins be remitted and their righteousness restored to them when the cause is fixed. When in the cause, force is justified, but force is only justified in the sense of dealing with the fixing of the things that are wrong there. And when that cause is dissolved and they're no longer in that, the judgeship dissolves and there's no furthering of that one's power to control anyone or to control them specifically, but to control anyone. So judges are never in a place of authority. They're in a place when they go into the cause that they have the need to and the ability to exercise force, but it's for the cause. When the cause is gone, then the force is gone. So the forcing things and the controlling things that are outside of directly adjudicatable causes, then they don't take the basis of their force from a harming action. They take their basis of their force from something else. And I'm saying that the only time that force is right between men is when you're stopping that cause and stopping that harm. So the initiation of force that we hear as libertarians, and maybe mantras, I guess. You can do anything you want. You're free to do everything you want, except for initiating force against others and aggressing others, and that's right. But the justification for bringing force to someone is legitimate and right within the returning of their force and adjudicating a cause, and outside of a cause, then the force that comes is the origination, the responding to the original force of the harm and the actions that they took to harm the harmed. That is the origination of force. And judgeship is not the origination of force. Judgeship is dealing with that original force. When this is not a judgeship situation, there has been no action of harm, like in that you would say someone's condemned because a law says that they can't do something or can do something. Or can't do something, I'm sorry, that would be specific. I distracted myself. Where does the force come from outside of that adjudicatable harm? It has to be originated because it's not responding to an action of a forcing action of harm that someone took. That's the origination. So the origination is always wrong. Originating force against someone is always not allowable with right in righteousness. You can't say it's illegal because, what are you going to do? You're going to subject everything to a bunch of rules that a bunch of people made when none of them are dealing with a cause originally. So all of that stuff falls apart when you recognize that that's forcing men because you chose to and for reasons outside of the authority of a judge. So there is I said authority. Outside of the right power of a judge to respond to an action of harm. Everything that they call authority is not that. They may call a judge's ability to break up a fight like that. They may call that authority, and that's close enough to right. But outside of that, they have things they call authority, where they say people get to say, and people get to be in charge, and they get to do various levels of tyranny to reduce and take over and control the liberty of men and decide for them, make them. None of that stuff comes as the force to respond to an action of harm. And laws that say you can't do it, they're not dealing with a guilty man that they can force. They're dealing with a man who hasn't done that yet, who they can't force. And this is why laws, and this is why the Old Testament laws, even like Moses and those kinds of ideas, those things are not right. It's not that Jesus had made God finally figure out how things were right and God stopped telling people what to do. God wasn't telling people what to do. Men were saying that God was telling people what to do. And they were spreading condemnation and force all around and claiming that God had been the one who originated their setup or whatever. So I'll just read these two things and then I'll stop. We're almost at the end of my half hour, I guess. So the cause cannot justify forcing a collective. There are never more than two people that are in the cause where this force is right, and outside of the cause, if the force is not right, then you can't force a collective because there's no way. I don't know. There may be one-on-one fights that can be done this way. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But to say that you get to force a collective, you get to bring force around a collective, it loses its reality and its locality of one versus one by going into something that's a fiction. So as I was getting ready to start in, I was thinking about the fictional idea of the collective, and that you have to control everyone, and past, around the corner down there, a house where I don't see anybody, that has anything to do with me is fictional. I've never met them, and I never will, and so anything that's said to be shared between us is not shared between us. Anything that would be claimed to bind on us as members of something is all going to be fiction, all going to be built by men. And the other thing I'd written there is remission and retention shows that God does not judge. And I need to mess with ideas about prosecutors, that God is ever prosecutes. And that'll have to be another thing. Whosoever sins you remit, they are remitted them. Whosoever sins you retain, they are retained. He said that to men. And that means that men retain for a cause, or they remit to excuse from a cause. So men decide whether there's a cause, and men adjudicate those things. So heaven and what Jesus would have been saying there, God and heaven are not the ones who decide someone's guilty. What decides if someone's guilty is the cause. This is the blamability and that kind of thing. Blame outside of a cause. This might be a second part of the message, because the condemnation and the guilt that you and I have been taught to believe in, they should also not exist outside of the cause. People are not blamable unless someone's blaming them, and if they're blaming someone, there's a cause. If someone's accusing you and bringing you to a cause, then someone is demanding that you be found to be in guilt and having harmed. Outside of a cause, no one is accusing you, so there is no legitimate idea to be blamed, and there's no cause that you could be that the sins that you supposedly think you're guilty of, they can't be retained, because there's no cause for the retention and the cause are the same thing. The causes happen because the sins are retained. They're not going to excuse you. They're going to try to get you dealt with because of your harm. So in that you can be guilty, and outside of that, the guilt is imaginary. And outside of that, believing that God holds you guilty because God's some special strict kind of father figure, whatever he does, and he goes by, and what Jesus said, remission and retention, that statement shows that heaven goes by whether there's a cause, whether people are still locked in the condemnation of being locked in a cause with each other, and that is something that men deal with, and that's where men judge. And moving that off into eternity and saying that God's going to judge later, there's other things you can talk about that, but then transferring that back and saying that God is prosecuting and judging us now because of how well we do, or how much we mess with what he said, we think he said, that there's no cause for that. And causes are between men. So it's going to be starting a new episode, so I'll stop.